Good morning. My name is Esther Manheimer. I'm mayor of the city of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to the April 6th agenda briefing work session. All council members and staff are participating virtually. The live meeting will be streamed on the city's YouTube channel, accessed through the YouTube icon on the front page of the city's website or via the live stream. The live meeting will be available on Charter Spectrum Channel 193. You may listen to the meeting via phone 855-925-2801, meeting code 4631. We will not take public comment during this meeting. And before I turn it over to the city manager, Deborah Campbell, I just wanted to apologize for my camera not being on. I am in a place where I don't have Wi-Fi. So I'm trying my best to participate in this meeting virtually. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our city manager, Deborah Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning, everybody. We are going to provide you with an overview of a number of items on the agenda that is coming up for your April 11th meeting. Ben Woody is going to be leading the discussion, and I think Rachel Wood will be chiming in occasionally, both assistant city managers. And our main event for today will be a legislative update that will be provided by our city attorney, Brad Brannon. So at this point, I will turn it over to Mr. Woody.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell, and good morning, Mayor and members of council. I will begin today by reviewing our upcoming agenda for the Tuesday, April 11th meeting. We're actually starting on Tuesday at 3 p.m. with a budget work session during which the budget staff will discuss compensation, revisit water fees, and any other new investments associated with the budget process. Moving on to the regular meeting at 5 p.m., we have two proclamations, one for Parkinson's Awareness Month and the other for Food Waste Reduction Month. Under the consent agenda, we have a number of items. If you would like me to stop at any point, please just let me know. Or if you have any questions, I'm going to try to hit a couple of highlights in the consent agenda. Starting with items B and C. These two items are actually related to one another. Item B is the acceptance of ARPA grant funds from the North Carolina Division of Environmental Quality. Item C is then a contract to use those funds to move forward with a pre-construction study for the North Fork and William DeBrule water treatment plants. And the reason these two items are before you is the state's encouraging direct filtration plants, which those two are, to investigate future improvements to be better prepared to meet and treat expected variability in the quality of raw water supply, as well as to ensure that our plants meet new regulatory requirements that are on the horizon. The ARPA grant provides $400,000 for the study. The water department's operating budget is going to provide the remaining $7,609 for the total cost of the study. Moving on to item D. This is the resolution authorizing the city manager to apply to the Mellon Foundation for a $3 million non-matching grant. This grant will support implementation efforts associated with the Pack Square visioning project that is ongoing. This would include the areas that the grant would potentially support from the planning effort is, one, it could support the design and construction drawings for any physical improvements to Pack Square that are associated with the recommendations of that study. It can support the design of a gateway corridor connecting Pack Square to the block. Also could improve the quality and quantity of history and storytelling efforts about the area. Those are three areas that are identified in the planning process that will probably move forward as recommendations for your consideration. And again, this Mellon Foundation grant can help support that. The Pack Square Visioning Plan itself will be released to the public later this month for public review. The grant application went to PED at their March meeting, and they did recommend approval to the full council. And the Mellon Foundation, if the city is awarded the grant, we expect announcements will be made in June of this year. Moving forward to item F on the consent agenda. This is a $2.6 million contract that is part of the city's annual street resurfacing program. So every year the Public Works Streets program will go in and identify a number of streets for resurfacing. This contract is not associated with bond funds. So this is the streets program annual operating budget for street resurfacing. This particular contract provides for the resurfacing of 14 city streets that total 6 miles. The streets that are selected, and the streets are listed in the agenda item. The streets that are selected for resurfacing are done so using a pavement management software program that Public Works has. Moving on to item H, quick note on that. This is the issuance of bonds by the housing authority. So this is not the city of Asheville. However, there is an IRS requirement that says if housing authorities issue bonds, they still require city council approval. So you're not obligating the city to anything. You're just approving the issuance of these housing authority bonds. And then the final consent agenda item is item J, and I am actually going to ask our city attorney, Brad Branham, to cover that item.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben, and good morning, council members. This is a consideration of an ordinance that we are making a suggested minor modification to. Currently, there is a prohibition against anyone storing or leaving or abandoning any property on city property. There was an exclusion specifically for bikes and strollers. The point of that was to allow people to be able to leave those in bike racks for a longer period of time. However, for whatever reason, when this ordinance was put into place, there was never a cutoff to prevent people from simply abandoning those things on public property. So we are trying to propose the institution of a minor modification to the ordinance, which would still allow people to leave their bikes and strollers in bike racks and on city property, but to place a 24-hour limitation on that. That would allow people to remove those items at the end of any day, to have them stored throughout the course of the day. But our goal was to allow city staff to be able to, at some point, remove items that have simply been abandoned. At this point, the language does not allow for that. And I do see 2 hands up, so I think Councilwoman Roney first.
Thank you. I have a few questions about this. I'll start with why. There were times when I would ride my bike downtown to work and maybe have a flat tire. After work, you have to go get the things to fix your tire or find someone to come and get your bike. It could take longer than what might appear to be 24 hours. So I'm wondering about enforcement. What happens after someone's bike is taken? How do they retrieve it? I have some curious things about logistics here, and I don't want us to get into a position of having to store people's bikes somewhere else. So my initial suggestion would be like, why not extend it to 72 hours? And maybe you can help me understand why we did it on 24.
Excellent question. And let me go ahead and answer that first. There is no specific science around the 24 hours. The goal is to close essentially what we see as a loophole. We do not want to prevent anybody from having access to these particular public utilities with regard to the bike ramps. We also want people to have the ability to leave them there for an extended period of time. What we want to try to create is the opportunity for city staff to be able to deal with abandoned items or people who are simply taking advantage of this particular ordinance provision at the exclusion of others. So if we have situations where someone has left multiple things for many days at a time, then you are essentially prohibiting others from utilizing that space. So those are the tackling issues that we're trying to address here. But there's nothing stopping us from extending this 24-hour proposal out to, say, 48 hours or a period that council would feel comfortable with.
Okay, so following up on that, do we have any way that we deal with abandoned cars? Because, I mean, using the public right-of-way to store property, there's a lot of different ways that happens in cars is probably the most common. But I wonder if it's possible, if we're going to do something like that, to make it match. So, like, I could say, like, a week, but it would make more sense, it seems to me, if we have something that matches for other types of automobiles or transportation devices.
We do have several ordinances on the books currently that deal with abandoned vehicles or vehicles. There's nothing that allows a vehicle not to be parked legally within a public space for any specific time. But if a vehicle truly becomes abandoned on public property, there is an allowance, and I cannot immediately recall the time frame of that lets city staff go in and take action to remove that vehicle. The way that we would deal with bikes is that we would essentially remove the bike from the bike rack per se and maintain that until someone came and picked it up. Now, if no one ever came and picked it up, we would eventually dispose of that, but we would not immediately dispose of anyone's property. We would keep that for a certain amount of time to allow them the option to retrieve it.
Okay, so if there's not going to be any, unless there's like a serious rush and we're just like trying to close a loophole, I wonder if we should take this back to policy and finance, because that only makes me have more questions.
I'm not really interested in that, Councilwoman Roney. I mean, is anyone else on council objecting to this particular item? I just want to see if there's anyone else with any concerns. I hear what you're saying about 24 hours. Maybe we need to make it 48 hours, but I'm not, unless there's other folks on council that want to massage this
I have some
more.
things to share. I think it's only me left. This is Sage. I just wanted to share a concern for the time period. We have a lot of bike theft in this community. I don't want anything to appear like we are now part of it. I think a longer notice. And the only other thing that struck me was if you park your car somewhere and it is removed because it wasn't supposed to be there that long, there's requirements around signage of where you may find that vehicle. So I think that we would probably have to do something like that. But I would appreciate longer than 24 hours. Otherwise, it makes sense. I was going to ask what prompted this. It sounds like we have clutter and broken bikes and miscellaneous things being left on city property that are just, you don't have the right to grab. So longer periods should address that for me.
Sage, do you have a period of time that you would?
I think 48 to 72 hours is probably fine. If somebody's using their bike regularly, they are going to come fix it and get it.
Mayor, I'd like to jump in. Just kind of similar thoughts. I appreciate Councilwoman Romney bringing up extending the time period. As a bike commuter, I have definitely run into situations of my go-to bike racks are cluttered with stuff that have basically been stripped, and it's like, what's going to happen here? And I can't even park. So I like the idea of staff being empowered to clear things up. And I think the 48 to 72 would be sufficient, especially since my bike is my primary vehicle. Like, I won't let it go 72 hours without me resolving. So that's my, that's a pretty important vehicle for me. So
let me layer in one last thought. We also sticker vehicles before they're towed. I don't want to make this a huge administrative process, but something has to be done if someone's property, if they were expecting it to be there, a notice, something. That's all.
I agree with the notice. That's why I was suggesting it could go back to policy and finance, because if we have a really clear opportunity for people to provide input on what is a notice, is it a sticker, where do I get it after it's done, what's the signage, there's like multiple moving parts here. I think 72 hours can clear it up. And for some reason, we need to move really fast.
And if I may, to that point, this ordinance, it was already on the book. So let me be clear. We're not adding a new ordinance. And the ordinance actually prescribes low-level criminal penalties for abandoning these things. It's a misdemeanor if you violate this ordinance. Because of that, state law requires this to come before council twice before it could ever be passed. Again, we're not imposing any new criminal penalties. We're simply placing a time limit upon the prohibition. We are more than happy to extend that period out per council's direction on this, as well as I think add in some additional notice, either in the form of signage, and I will work personally with city staff to be able to provide that. But this will have to come before you not just on Tuesday night, but at your meeting, your second meeting in April as well. So you will have the opportunity to give ample consideration to this and hear it more than once before having to make a final vote.
Okay, sounds good. So Tuesday you'll have it sounds like there's consensus around 72 hours, and you'll let us know some information about the signage.
We will happily make those updates and proceed with giving you a more robust proposal on Tuesday night.
Okay, thank you, Brad, for that review of that item. So that is that concludes the consent agenda. So if no other questions, I'll continue to keep moving. Under presentations and reports, we have two items. We have an annual report presentation from the Asheville Board of Alcoholic Control. We also have our quarterly CIP update from our Capital Projects Director, Jay Dundas. As we move to public hearings, Katie, if you could go ahead and share the map of the annexation agreement, please. Under public hearings, we have a public hearing to consider an annexation agreement between the city of Asheville and the town of Woodfin. The town of Woodfin received a petition from the property owner at 810 Elk Mountain Road to voluntarily annex 96 acres. This is the property that's adjacent to the Sourwood Inn, which a voluntary annexation agreement was previously approved in November of 2022. So for council members that were here in November, you probably have some familiarity with this situation, but you can see the subject property is in the red circle on the map. It is outside of both the town of Woodfin and city of Asheville contiguous city limits. When that is the case, if a property owner requests a voluntary annexation, the general statutes require that the two cities involved, in this case, Asheville and Woodfin, enter into an annexation agreement. What Asheville is, in this case, the subject property is closer to the city of Asheville than it is to the town of Woodfin. But again, the property owner is requesting annexation into the town of Woodfin. What Asheville is agreeing to as part of the annexation agreement is to not seek to annex this property, which in any event, the city of Asheville doesn't have the legislative authority to do involuntary annexation. So it would only be annexed into a municipality if the property owner were to request that. And again, in this case, I'm requesting annexation into the town of Woodfin, and this parcel is adjacent to a property in November that was previously annexed into the town of Woodfin through an annexation agreement. So hopefully that makes sense. I think, Brad, you did the presentation last time. I believe that Will Palmquist will do it this time, but I just wanted to show the map to kind of illustrate that a little more. Okay, Katie, thank you for sharing that. Moving on to the other, we had the consideration of the South Slope Neighborhood Vision Plan scheduled. However, we are continuing that item to your June 13th meeting to allow the staff additional time to meet with residents and business owners in the Southside area. So more to come on that item. We'll bring it back to council on June 13th for that public hearing. No unfinished business on this agenda. Moving on to new business, we have boards and commissions appointments, which I'll talk about a little bit under the council committee agenda review. And then finally, council will have an economic development incentive closed session at our meeting. That concludes the review of the council agenda. Are there any last questions on your meeting agenda? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on back to our briefing work session agenda. And we're going to review upcoming council committees this month. And so I actually also have the first two council committees. So we have Planning and Economic Development Council Committee scheduled for April 10th at 4 p.m. In that meeting, we have one agenda item, and at that meeting, transportation staff is going to present an overview of the draft scope of work framework that's been developed by city and county staff for a joint transit master plan project. So that'll be a discussion topic at PED. At the Boards and Commissions Committee meeting, which is scheduled for April 11th at 1 p.m., the Boards and Commissions Committee will consider 8 advisory board appointments at that meeting. As of note, this is going to be our last monthly meeting of appointments. As council remembers at our previous meeting, we are moving our boards and commissions appointments to more of a cycle. So the next round of advisory board appointments will be in June for the summer cycle of appointments. And if there's no question on those two council committees, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel Wood, our other assistant city manager, to cover the Equity and Engagement Committee. council committee.
Thank you, Ben, and good morning. I want to start with a quick thank you to the Housing and Community Development Committee, as well as the Equity and Engagement Committee. We have met several times over the last month and are going to continue to meet several times in the month of April as we consider CDBG, Housing Trust Fund, and the Strategic Partnership Grant application. So thank you for the stamina that you've had and your availability to meet as many times as we've had to meet as we consider those applications. April 13th is a special called meeting of the Equity and Engagement Committee. The only agenda item for this meeting is to hear presentations from the 23 agencies that submitted applications for the Strategic Partnership Grant process. Applicants will have 3 minutes to present on their application and provide information on why they are seeking Strategic Partnership Grant funds. I will remind the City Council that we did approve as part of the pilot and reaffirm that with the Equity and Engagement Committee earlier this year that the scope of the Strategic Partnership Grant Program is now narrowed to addressing the opportunity gap for low to moderate income school-aged youth. So that's something that went into effect in July 2022 that we're continuing with this next round of funding. Following the April 13th Equity and Engagement Committee, we then on the morning of April 18th have a Housing and Community Development Committee meeting. This is the third time that Housing and Community Development Committee will have met since March 29th. The meeting is at 10 a.m. and so there are 3 key agenda items. First includes the terms of the potential Hunt Hill property sale to My Daddy Taught Me That. Next will be final funding decisions for the Housing Trust Fund applicants. We heard earlier this week from the 5 applications, received presentations on those applications. And then there is a land use incentive grant request for Fairhaven Summit, which is also a Housing Trust Fund applicant. On the afternoon of April 18th, Equity and Engagement Committee will meet again. There are 3 key agenda items. First is the Reparations Annual Report, as well as the Reparations Commission Status Update. So the committee is going to hear from Chair Dr. Dwight Mullen, Vice Chair Dewana Little, as well as from Brenda Mills, our Director of Equity and Engagement. So from the Chair and Vice Chair, you'll receive an update on the annual report from the Community Reparations Commission. And then Brenda's going to give an update on progress that's being made with the Commission and also an overview of items that are planned for the April 24th Reparations Commission meeting. The committee will then get an update from Dowa Hitch on Analytics, Language, and Accessibility Project. And then the final item on the agenda will be funding considerations for Strategic Partnership Grants. So the plan is the recommendations will be made by Housing and Community Development Committee at their April 18th meeting, then brought to full council for consideration at the April 25th meeting. And that covers the multitude of EEC and HCD agenda items we have coming before you.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. If there's no questions on our council committee meeting agenda items, we're now going to turn it over to City Manager Deborah Campbell to review the 8-week upcoming agenda items.
Okay, hopefully you have the link to the outline of the coming items to your agenda, and I'll go to the April the 25th, meeting. And of note, you heard from Rachel that a committee will be looking at the Hunt Hill property conveyance to My Daddy Taught Me That. There are a number of other items on the consent agenda related to Federal Transit Administration and the receipt of funding and or applying for funding. There are a number of public hearings, rezonings, and one amendment to the UDO ordinance on the 25th. And then on May 9th will be a pretty special meeting for us where the budget will be presented. The manager's budget will be presented. And then on May 23rd, will be the public hearing for the budget. And I will see if there are any questions about some of the upcoming items. If not, Ben, turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Deborah. So that brings us to the other issues and updates section of our briefing agenda. And we have two items this month. We have Jay Dundas is going to give an update on the Hazel Robinson Amphitheater. And when Jade is done, Brad Branham is going to review our legislative agenda update, or legislative update, excuse me. So Jade, I see you're on the call, so I will turn it over to Jade Dundas, our Capital Projects Director, to share some information on the Hazel Robinson Amphitheater.
Thank you, Ben. Jade Dundas, Capital Projects Director. So over the weekend with the high winds, we had trees that are they're adjacent to the amphitheater and the stage, and one of those trees lost a large limb, which fell on the structure. There is roof damage to that structure, and we were out yesterday and kind of did an initial assessment of that. The tree's been removed, allowing us to get in there and do some initial assessment of that. The damage to the roof is fairly significant, but we're meeting with DSD representatives today to kind of get an idea of the path forward, and to try to identify what that project will actually turn into. And so basically informing council of the damage and that we are investigating. But we'll have additional information as time goes on. I do know that there is having been on site yesterday, there is another project out there to improve the stage. So right now there's no immediate disruption to any kind of activity out there because they are in the process of making those improvements. But we're not sure on what the timeline of our project will be because we're just really trying to get the hands around the scope of that project. So we'll keep you updated.
Great. Thank you, Jade, for the updates. Are there any questions on Hazel Robinson? If not, then Brad, I'll turn it over to you for the legislative update.
Okay, thank you again, Ben, and hello again. Maybe some of the high points, some of the things to make sure that you are aware of. Many of these you likely are already aware of, but it also gave you the opportunity to ask any questions, and maybe I can provide a little additional insight as to where things stand on some of these bills. So I want to say up front that this is not a comprehensive list of everything that you or anyone else in the city may care about. So if there are items, additional bills, or legislative policies that you're curious about, please stop me, let me know. We can either address those as part of this conversation, and if I don't have all the information today, I assure you that I will get it for you and provide that to the full council. But with that said, Katie, if you could advance to the next slide. I want to start out first just by giving you a little sense of what the calendar looks like. We are currently in the legislative long session. This takes place in odd numbered years, so we're 2023. Every January this starts, and it typically runs till about summertime. Now I say typically because we have been anything but typical in the last few legislative sessions. We've even had times where it seemed as if we never actually closed the session. So we are looking very closely at the pace of the current legislative calendar, and it appears there is a chance that we might actually close out and end the session sometime around June or maybe the 1st of July. There are some skeptics about that, and I would be remiss to say that I wasn't perhaps among them. But I do think we are likely to see an end of a session with a passed budget sometime at least by the end of summer. Now, some important deadlines for you to be aware of is that we are coming up very quickly on the crossover deadline. And for those who don't know, that means that any bills that initiate in one of the two houses, either the Senate or the House, must fully pass that particular body and move over to the other house by May the 4th. If they do not, they are technically not moving forward any further in this session. So you're going to see a lot of bills be filed. Those things that will be advancing quickly over the next couple of weeks. Now, as far as local bills go, the deadline both in the House and the Senate for filing those local bills has already passed last month. So we should be done with any local bills that are not already on file and going through the committee process right now. Now, if you'll move on to the next slide, Katie, we can jump straight into some of the bills that I want to highlight for you today. A couple of financial ones. We're going to start off easy and move into some of the heavy hitters later on. So these first couple are, I think, of note, but not anything that I would worry terribly about at this point. The first one, House Bill 122 and its accompanying Senate Bill 299. This is actually a bill that would impose new penalties on any municipality that failed to complete their required annual audit in time. Oddly enough, the penalty for this is actually withholding sales tax revenue until the audit is completed. That seems a bit odd in that really punishes the citizens and residents of a city who depend upon those funds to provide for the services that they need, as opposed to the actual governmental staff, but this is the current wording in the bill. This is something that the League is opposed to and is currently working hard to either improve or stop this bill. The second one I want to highlight is House Bill 273. This is a little bit more concerning. It would actually require all municipalities to have 2 budget hearings. Right now, you're only required to have 1 statutory hearing on the annual budget, although we actually had 2 this year. The bigger, more interesting part of this is that anytime going forward, if this bill were to pass, and the municipalities such as Asheville were to raise the tax rate or increase any utility fees, so perhaps our water fee or similar fees, you would not only be required to have a second hearing just on that item, but you would also be required to physically mail notice to every single ratepayer and or property owner, depending upon if we're talking about taxes or utility rate. So we've checked pretty quickly on that and found that the likely expense to the city every time that would occur would be in the thousands of dollars. So you're kind of taking away some of the impact of actually adjusting your fees or forcing you to raise the fees even more to be able to do this. So this is something that the League of Municipalities is working very diligently on with the bill sponsor to try to improve that particular bill, because we do feel like it places an unnecessary financial and logistical burden on cities to be able to actually hand mail every single individual in the city a notice of those particular items. All right, if you'll move on, Katie. The next couple of issues are really more what I call process changes, potentially. The first one is House Bill 205. And this is one that actually would impose upon you as city council members the duty to take a financial management 6-hour training course. Now, that doesn't apply to you automatically. It would only apply to those cities that are in a bit of financial distress. So if the local government commission has had to step in and take over, or if you have had the city placed upon a list of distressed municipalities, that's when that obligation kicks in. However, you would be highly encouraged by the ordinance to take that financial management course. So this isn't something that, given our strong financial management here in Asheville, that we're terribly concerned about, but I wanted to bring it to your attention because it would affect your obligations as council members directly. The other one we are a little more concerned about, and that's Senate Bill 254. This is, amongst other things, specifically targeted at expanding the public records law with regard to personnel records. Right now, personnel records, as you probably know, are generally very protected under confidentiality provisions. However, this particular bill would expand the allowance to make it a public record, not just that someone might have been demoted or even discharged, but it would require the municipality to provide a reason for that discharge and make that a public record. So this is the first in a very long time legislative initiative which would greatly expand the depth of the public's access into individual staff members' personnel records. So we're watching that very closely as well. Next slide, Katie. All right, I do want to bring in some good news now at this point so that we can mix up sort of the good and bad here. One of the items on your legislative initiative agenda that we passed previously that was submitted to our local delegation was a request to expand the authorization to respond to certain traffic incidences outside of sworn law enforcement officers. We are proud to say that through the efforts of our local delegation, as well as our lobbyists and the General Assembly as a whole, we were able to get Senate Bill 251 passed, we're close, but we're not quite there yet. We're very, very close to getting final passage on Senate Bill 251, which would allow law enforcement officers no longer to be required to respond to non-injury related automobile crashes. So this would let civilian crash investigators take on that burden, which is now placed on law enforcement officers. This would not involve any incidents where there was a criminal incident or where there was personal injury. It would only be minor incidents where property damage was involved. So this is something that is already in existence in Wilmington, and we've been pushing for this as a way to continue along your initiative of reimagining public safety and finding creative ways to take some of the burden off of our law enforcement personnel. Next, Katie. Okay, the next ones I want to talk about are getting a little more into some of the nitty gritty, specifically around land use. The first one, Senate Bill 317, is one you may have heard of. This has been styled as the Workforce Housing Bill. And this has been put forward essentially on its face as a way to expand affordable housing. However, there are some pretty severe limitations to the way this bill is written. It would require all municipalities to allow these particular developments to go forward without the ability to enforce zoning for the most part. So in other words, all of the requirements we have around things like tree saves, steep slope ordinance, all of that would have to be put aside if someone was going to satisfy the requirements under this bill to develop workforce housing. So what do we mean by workforce housing? That is defined in this bill as being 20% of the total development being provided for AMIs at 80 to 100%. So not terribly affordable, first of all, but also the affordability period would actually be a majority of 1 year. So you would have to have essentially 6 months and a day of affordability. And after that, it would no longer be required for any of the units to be affordable. And for this, municipalities give up all right to zone the property. You would only be able to enforce those land use regulations that are set at a state or federal level. So this is a pretty big deal. I can tell you that we've been lobbying to improve the conditions of this bill along with other municipalities in the league. And I can tell you that at this point, it is losing quite a bit of steam. Many of the original bill sponsors have removed their name from the bill. And we are getting word just this morning that some of the leadership within the House and the Senate are moving away from supporting it as well. So this is looking like it may not move forward in its current iteration. The next one I want to point out to you, we got a question, Sage.
Just curious who put that bill forth.
Yeah, so 317 originally had numerous sponsors. Its primary sponsor was Senator Newton, Senator Moffitt, and Senator Lowe were the original sponsors of that bill. And they are still sponsors, but some of the ones that were supporting it are no longer including their names.
Yeah, this is Esther. We're hearing that's dying a rapid death. And we were asked to give some feedback to the Metro Mayors Coalition that was trying to solicit feedback from all the cities, and Brad's group did a good job of getting that feedback back, and also a map that had, what are the 10-acre plus parcels left in the city of Asheville? And it looked like there could be several golf courses at risk, but otherwise there wasn't a lot. There wasn't too much land that might even fall into this category for us anyway. But anyway, like Brad mentioned, this bill looks like it's dying a rapid death.
Yeah, I do want to commend the Lee municipalities working very strongly in the halls of Raleigh to make sure that this one was vetted very thoroughly. And Sage, I see your hand still up. Do you have an additional
Just
question?
real quick. Yep. This HB 409, we already allow this in all our residential zones, which is a great thing. It'd be great for the rest of the state to adopt it. Do we ever support things even though we've already got them? Because
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And you're referring down to the last item on this particular slide, that is House Bill 409, which essentially would make a by right availability to have a ADU, that's an accessory dwelling unit, for every single residential property. So in other words, this would restrict the ability of conditional zoning to limit that, any other zoning provisions locally. If you had a residential lot, you would have the ability to add an ADU. This is also, although not on its face, it's pretty clear this is intended to address housing stock and affordable housing issues. We have not to this point put our voice forward, but there are a lot of municipalities as well as the league working to perhaps smooth the edges around this particular bill to just retain some local control over this while still allowing those bills that are going to advance affordable housing to move forward. Yes, Sage.
I just want to make sure I understand, because you're making it sound like we don't already allow this, but this is already a by right use in Asheville.
So
You have to meet the requirements. It's not just any lot.
Right. I mean, there are sizes, setbacks, et cetera, like any other house or structure, but we do allow all residential zones to have ADUs by right.
Within the bounds of meeting those conditions. So as the mayor pointed out, we do have some local zoning authority over this right now. This bill would take it a step further and essentially remove those local controls.
Oh.
So we would like to see some improvements made to this particular bill that retains some of that local authority. So as we always say, when you're on the ground and you see it locally, you know best about what might create a problem. So we always want to have as much of that local retained control as possible. But yes, Sage, this is something that we're communicating some of the positives as well as the negatives about this particular bill on.
Okay, I didn't quite catch that. So this could actually remove our ability to require the setbacks and so on. Okay.
In
Gotcha.
its current form, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So I do want to point out just one last bill on this slide, if I could, and that is House Bill 332, and its accompanying Senate Bill 275. This is a bill that is intended on its face to expedite the building approval process. It applies specifically to multifamily and commercial buildings. This is one that's highly concerning, and myself, Assistant City Manager Ben Woody, have both been serving on the task force statewide that has been working through the league to develop some response to this. Very targeted information has been gathered and provided to the legislators about why we're not exactly big fans of this. This would require anybody who submitted a plan for the development of either a commercial or a multifamily building. So think large stuff, generally speaking. The requirement would be placed upon the municipality to be able to approve all of those plans within a very short time frame. And in fact, what we're talking about here is, I believe it's 21 days. And let me be very clear about that. Let's see, 21 days you would have. And that is a very, very short turnaround for us to be able to approve building plans. We have seen some of the negative effects. I will point out the condo complex that collapsed in Florida not too long ago. This is a state in Florida that had much, much less strict regulations around building permit review and approval. So we are very, very cautious about wanting to move those things forward. Instead, we would prefer to do as much as we can locally to improve the efficiency of our process. And we have provided a lot of information about the improvements that have already been made, not just here in Asheville, but around the state around this. But we believe that this is perhaps something that would have very minor benefit in terms of the process and produce quite a great deal of risk. Yes, Maggie.
Yeah, thanks for flagging this one. We have building codes for a reason. We used to have fires in our buildings all the time. Code is such an important safety measure. So really excited to hear that we're showing leadership at the state level to protect a process that keeps people safe. A question I had, you were mentioning that in the current state of play of this legislation, it might reduce the time to 20 or so days. What ballpark averages or what metrics do we use for our building review timing? Like what neighborhood of how long does it take for us to do this process now?
Well, that is a great question. And I'm actually going to ask Ben Woody to maybe answer these questions because we just so happen to have an expert here that can probably provide you better information. I will say But I do want to commend our interim Director of Development Services, Mark Matheny. He has been going above and beyond to provide answers to those very questions, as well as other people sharing his role all around the state. And that has been combined into a very, very good and concise report by the League of Municipalities that we provided to all the legislators behind this, so they can see what we believe is the truth of the matter, which is the delays that are being complained of, generally speaking, are not the result of a municipal process. We are seeing the vast majority of delays in the building review process be on the side of developers. Even perhaps they're not submitting fully developed plans, or there are issues with the engineering, or we have to ask for more information. So we think that trying to address this on the municipal side misses the boat in terms of the process. And in fact, I think Ben can speak to that directly.
Yeah, good question, Councilman Holman, and I want to just echo part of what Brad said. The review time is partially dependent on the quality of the submission. The better the submission, the faster it can get reviewed and turned around. And then, in fairness, there are times when cities' own staffing issues can impact that. It's not always easy to fill building plan review positions. So there's variables that come into play, but generally, to answer your question, there's 3 levels of building plan review: level 1, 2, and 3. And I'm talking really about residential building plan review. Small residential, that happens in probably 4 or 5 days. But for commercial projects, level 1, which is a minor alteration, should be less than 10 business days, between 10 or less. Level 2, which is a more significant project, maybe a small addition or larger renovation, that's typically between 10 and 21 business days. And then if you have what's called a level 3 project, and those are big, those are hotels and like hospital additions and things that are very complex. Those are realistically going to take between 21 and 45 business days. So again, it kind of tiers depending on, and those are plan sheets that have literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of plans. So that's kind of the 3 buckets that we try to operate in DSD. We aren't always successful at those, but that's generally what we try to do.
I have a follow-up question. How have those review periods changed over time? Like, are we at an all-time fast pace? Are we at a slow pace? Like, do we track? I'm sure that data is available, and I know that we watch that. I would just be curious to know, in the context of still globally recovering from the pandemic, us having staffing shortages, just kind of the red light, green light, yellow light, where do we compare to our past performance? Which might not be an answer you have now, but I think that's important stuff for us to be aware of as, my next door neighbor is considering an addition, what's going to have to happen there, or downtown growth is being considered, et cetera.
Yeah, I can answer that. So again, residential. So if you're doing something to a single family home, we're very consistent. We'll turn those around in about 5 business days. And that's really been the case for a long time. There's always outliers. So if somebody's listening, yes, your deck may have taken more than 5 business days, but generally we do better than that. The commercial is very dependent on the volume of activity. So the number of permit applications we have and the number of staff that we have to do that. And it's not just having a staff. If you're not a level 3 qualified building plan reviewer, you can't even look at level 3 building plans. So there's a lot of, and I'll just and to answer your question directly, the past year and a half has been very challenging for development services. It's been hard to come out of the pandemic. It's really busy. There's a lot of activity. And we've had some senior staff that have left over the past, really during the pandemic and after, we've had to replace. So I would say it's been a challenging period the past 18 months for our department, or for the development services department. Previous to the pandemic, we had really strong staff, and I think we were more regularly meeting some of those deadlines. So again, there's a lot of variability in it. Lately, it's been tough. It's been really busy. A lot of activity here in Asheville.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And,
I just want to follow up
Sage?
a little bit because I want clarity first. So the building review process, Brad, do you interpret this as like the staff review and TRC, or the actual entitlement?
So that's a good question. So this is the original building permit. I do not think this includes, say, the TRC review. And this is a very broad bill. It affects a lot, and it is generally regulated to the big stuff. So it is oftentimes the very things that would go to TRC. But this is all concerned with the staff level review.
Okay. Because then just for clarity, Councilwoman Allman, like when we're reviewing some of these large apartment complexes, some of those are 18 months. Like this isn't a fast turnaround. And now some of that is labored by our many committee reviews and so on. I just didn't want everybody to have the impression that these big projects are coming through in a couple months. That just simply isn't true. So if it's just the staff portion of building review, that's different. Also, I will point out too that in every survey we've done, when we were on affordable housing, when I was on that committee, we would survey developers every other year, I think, and say, what are your big crises? What are you facing? I think Ben and DSD were involved a little bit. And one of the pieces of input has always been that the duration and cost of entitlement is problematic to overall affordability. So just sharing that perspective. But again, I don't think we're talking about the whole process here, just.
No, and I want to amplify that. Councilman Turner, I'm only referring to the internal building safety staff review. So the numbers I gave did not incorporate any kind of zoning or entitlement from an elected body or advisory board. So good clarification.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree. Thank you for that, Sage. So if we can move on now to the last slide with I think it's the last slide with some legislation on it. We're closing with a big ticket one here. This is one that is always at the forefront of our minds here in Asheville, and this is short-term rental. We knew that we were going to see bills, and we have seen a flurry. So let me hit on a couple of these, and I'm going to start with the good, move to the moderate, and then go to the bigger ones. The first one is Senate Bill 290. This is one which, quite frankly, we don't have any qualms with. This deals with short-term rental, but it is really targeting what I'm going to call party houses. This would actually place regulations on those that have a short-term rental to properly advertise and enforce occupancy limits. So we have had apparently some issues statewide with small houses having short-term rental to 5, 10, 20 people at a time. It's creating a bit of a nuisance situation. So this would really place the burden on those who have short-term rental entitlements to do it right and to create a less intense nuisance use. So this is one that we're actually pretty supportive of. Now, let's move to where we do have some issues. The next one, and I apologize on this, I think there's an extra B or a 2 in there for no good reason, but it's supposed to be Senate Bill 325. This is a bill that would actually preempt local authority to regulate online marketplaces. So what does that mean? Online marketplaces are the platforms. If we're talking about Airbnb, Expedia, or VRBO, those are the actual online platforms where people locally place the listings of their particular short-term rental and all of the business actually occurs. So presently, we in Asheville, and as far as I'm aware, no one in the state of North Carolina actually regulates these platforms. We have discussed the possibility of that and the legality of that in the past. There are some municipalities around the country who have placed a burden locally on the platforms to handle enforcement of the local rules around short-term rental. But we haven't done that. This particular bill would be preemptively taking that authority away. So this is something that is obviously being espoused by the short-term rental platforms themselves and their lobbyists in Raleigh. And this is one we would not support simply because it would, even though we're not exercising it now, it would take away some of the potential local control that we might have if it's necessary. Now, there is one on here that is, well, there's one I want to talk to you about quickly that is not on this list, and it is only because it was filed just this morning. And this is a brand new Senate Bill 667. This was filed just within the last few hours, and this is another short-term rental bill. And I'm just going to be frank and say that this would fully preempt almost all local control over short-term rentals. It would essentially invalidate our ordinance that prohibits in almost all zoning areas whole home short-term rental. It would also invalidate our homestay provisions. So this would, for lack of a better phrase, strip all control that you have locally away from cities. So this was just filed in the Senate. We don't have a lot of information about it quite yet, but do keep in mind that crossover deadline that I mentioned at the beginning, May 4th. This would have to go all the way through and pass the Senate and move to the House by May 4th to continue unless they sort of change the rules on this. But this is one that we are most concerned about and going to be watching and working most vigorously on. So I don't know who raised their hand first, but I think, Kim, I'm going to go to you to start.
I guess a couple of questions are, when we were talking about this a couple of years ago, we had started a conversation with just a small group of council members. We were talking about doing regulation with the platforms. And at that time, it wasn't really clear to me that the impact of short-term rentals in Western North Carolina was being profoundly felt yet. But now I'm noticing that other cities are starting to have concerns too. I've spoken with folks in, for example, Durham and Hillsborough, are like, this is something to watch for and be careful. So I guess my main question right now is, what other cities are we kind of linking arms with as we see the ripple effects of temporary use for lodging being used, or residential zones being used for commercial use? And what other cities can we partner with to work towards making sure that we're protecting our residential uses?
That is an excellent question. And let me say this as emphatically as I can. There is strength in numbers, and it is important for us to utilize those partners that we may have out there across the state. Just yesterday afternoon, I led a roundtable discussion amongst city attorneys from the largest 13 municipalities across the state, where we focused solely on short-term rental local regulation. And we had a very, very robust discussion with cities that are already regulating this heavily, cities that are considering it, and cities that are on the back end and just now beginning to think about this. But we had an extremely productive conversation about what we're doing here in Asheville, what's happening in Raleigh and in Wilmington and some of the other cities, some of the considerations in places like Charlotte and Greensboro and Durham. And I got a strong sense that there is a growing recognition of the importance of this topic, the vital nature of local authority to regulate it, and a pretty good sense of how strongly we need to be watching what's happening in the legislature. So I do believe that we have partners out there, and we are growing those partnerships. I think, now meeting at least monthly with those other 13 municipality city attorneys so that we can talk about just these kinds of issues. And this is one of the forefront matters that we are concerning ourselves with. So we are trying our best to align some of the regulations that we've got and think about it along the same lines so that we are in lockstep as much as possible.
Well, and I would add
follow
that
up.
we've been raising the alarm bells about this for a long time with other cities, but it hasn't really gotten a lot of traction, just for the reason you said, Kim. It wasn't really like a burning issue for, other than Wilmington, really us and Wilmington, and then a few of the small resort communities like Spruce Pine and Highlands and places like that. So now finally Charlotte and Raleigh and places like that, this has become an affordable housing issue for them.
And I will note,
to
go ahead,
while
Kim.
you're, while you're meeting with these other cities and other potential partners in gaining understanding on what could look like to have a collective leveraging, is there a conversation at the same time happening while you're seated? It's like, well, what are we going to do about residential zoning being used for commercial use? Because it feels to me like the taxation issue is probably like a great tool if for some reason we lose the ability to regulate.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that was absolutely part of the discussion that we had yesterday. We talked about this from a variety of aspects, and that was one of them. There was a pretty robust discussion about that consideration. It was new to certain people, but we're beginning to think about it. And I will note that this particular bill does maintain the control for local municipalities to regulate short-term rental in commercial areas, but prohibits them from regulating it in residential areas. And in fact, it would prohibit us from characterizing that use as commercial. So this is really targeted directly at some of the things I think that we hold most dear and feel are most influential in us properly regulating this. So these are conversations that we're going to continue to have. And as I said, this is a growing concern. I found out just yesterday that in the city of Charlotte, they now have over 4,000 short-term rentals. And this is in a city with, not the same level of tourism demand, perhaps, as we're going to see in Wilmington and here in Asheville. But with that kind of quantity growing in those types of places, it is impossible for this to go now unnoticed.
Thanks.
Sage.
Yeah, I just want to layer a couple thoughts. Kim, on your last thought about commercial use, I concur about the taxation, but you may have heard me say this before. There's also this idea that if they became commercial uses, then there would be different compliance requirements around ADA, which would affect a lot of single family houses, door widths, ramps into houses and stuff. So it could slow the process of some standalone houses being used potentially. But I'm trying to be conscious that this check-in process is now all public and people are listening in, perhaps the media. So Brad, I was hoping maybe you could just give us a little more history here. Maybe how many times a bill like this has been brought, how many times it's been failed. This is the worst thing that could happen to Asheville on a housing level, in my opinion. I've long said the longer we stall, the more the impacts to other cities will happen, and then we will have a stronger argument. And that's finally happening, which is great. But I don't want us to incite fear in the community. A bill like this has been tried to force its way through for 4 or 5 years in a row? Okay.
We've seen this bill in multiple sessions. It's coming from multiple fronts. Different interest groups are putting that forward. And I can tell you that the money being placed into this, the influence, the amount of lobbyists trying to advance these types of bills is growing with each legislative session. I think the coalition we have that are fighting against it is also growing. But this has been on every single adopted legislative agenda by this city council since I have been your city attorney. And we're making it very, very clear that we believe this is absolutely imperative to maintain this local control. And we believe that it is best legislated locally because everyone has such a different, not only concern for what they're dealing with in their local community, but they have a unique awareness about the best ways to manage those problems reasonably locally. So I can tell you that it is at almost always at the top of my to-do list when I'm having conversations with other cities and when I have conversations with our delegation as well as other legislators who I speak with about these issues frequently. So this is not new. This is something that has been on the agenda in Raleigh for now at least 3 to 4 years. I suspect that there is no end in sight. And this is something that we have been fighting strongly against. I will give many thanks to our legislative liaison, Philip Isley, who works tirelessly in Raleigh behind the scenes to try to advance interest of Asheville such as this. And we spoke this morning about this and some of the other bills, and we're going to continue to work as diligently as we can to try to maintain some of this control locally and minimize the effects of these kind of things.
Thank you, Brad.
Absolutely. Okay. Any other questions about any of those bills before I move on? We're all done, I think, with the bills now. Kim, yes.
Is this the right time to ask about other legislative actions?
So we can move on to the next slide and at least let you see what's coming. As to close this, I wanted to move out of the bills and move into some of the laws that were passed. And I just want to highlight a couple of those things and then we'll be done. So if that's not what you wanted to ask about, feel free, Kim. Right now is the perfect time. Okay. I do want to just highlight a couple of big, impactful bills that became laws. So we have gone through the stage where these have been debated. They are now on the books, and I do want to bring them to your attention. The first is generally, I think, good news. Medicaid expansion through multiple sessions has been a topic of discussion. This was finally passed. This had been House Bill 76. It is now session law, 2023-07. I want to point out one very important aspect of this, though. Although this became law, it is still contingent upon the passage of an annual budget for the state, which means that if we do not pass a budget, this does not become law. Why does that matter? Number one, I want to make you aware that it's not already automatically law. And number two, this is going to place a very strong incentive on legislators as well as the governor's office to approve this year's budget. the budget is something that we will often see items added in that aren't necessarily budget items at the last minute and, quite frankly, behind closed doors. And because of that, and because of the strong incentive now with Medicaid expansion on the line to pass that budget, we are going to be watching very closely what items might get added to the budget at the very last minute and without any kind of public discourse, that there would again be this strong push to pass a budget so that Medicaid expansion can go into law. So we always watch that closely, but this year that's probably more true than in others. Now, the other one I just want to highlight for you is what had previously been Senate Bill 41 and is now Session Law 2023-8. This is the repeal of what had been law for many, many years in North Carolina that removed the background check for anyone who was purchasing a handgun. This used to require a background check, and you had to go through your local sheriff's office to be able to do. That is 100% gone now. I bring this up. I think this has been in the news a lot, so I really don't want to focus on the law itself here today, but I want to point out that this was the first governor's veto that we saw in this session, as well as the first time the governor's veto was overridden. This is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it shows us what I was going to say before 2 days ago, the fragility of the governor's veto. But as you probably are aware, we had a member just this week in the House actually switch parties and join the Republican caucus. And what that means is that as of today, there is now a veto-proof majority along party lines in both the House and the Senate. That will essentially allow the majority party, which is Republican at this point, to pass most of the initiatives that they would like to pass. And even the governor no longer can act as a backstop in many cases. So that's something that, quite honestly, I don't have a lot of additional information to report, but it's something that we should be aware of as we watch some of these other bills go forward. So with that, I'd like to advance on to the next slide and just say that I want to appreciate your time today. I know I've thrown a lot of information at you, but this is the time I've reserved for your questions. So Kim, please.
Sandra, you go ahead. I've already been talking all today.
Oh, okay. So the only thing I was going to ask about, you were speaking about the Medicare bill, where actually, you know, they can actually put other bills in with it. So have you seen it when you have this situation and some of the bills that we just went through that are there that may be weak, that they'll add them in? Have you seen that happen into yeah, I was just.
Yes, it's a short and unfortunate answer. Yes. They have this thing called conference, which is essentially a fancy way to say we go into closed rooms and work out some of the details of these things. And what happens is some of these earmarks, other initiatives and bills get thrown into the budget and they become part of the budget as a whole. And that entire legislation moves forward for either passage or not passage. And in many, many cases, we usually have a passed budget, not always, but because of Medicaid expansion being hinged and conditioned on passage of that budget, it is going to make it much harder for people to vote against a budget, even with some of what we often refer to as poison pills that have been included in those budgets at the end. So this is concerning, and it's something that I will be watching very, very closely as the budget materials become public. The bad news is we don't have the same options. We don't see those things until the last minute. So we don't have as many opportunities to work against them and lobby for improvements or removal of some of those more detrimental aspects.
It's going to be interesting. Thank you.
Very much. Kim.
Yeah, I've been looking at House Bill 504 and Senate Bill 543. I know those are smaller in comparison, but if we might maybe put those on the radar as far as what it might mean for us to be able to contract directly with the ATU 128 drivers. I know this bill is about removing barriers for being able to contract directly with organized labor. So I know there's probably going to be a financial impact. Hopefully it would be in a positive way. But as we're looking at what it could look like for a city-county merger, being able to negotiate directly with our transit drivers could be something we should be prepared to look at. And I'm not sure how hopeful it is that it'll pass. But that's why I would ask it to be on the radar if it's possible, if capacity.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kim. And I do have that on my ever-growing list of bills that I check in on almost daily. So we will keep you posted about that. And I would just remind you again, watch that crossover deadline. It's coming up very quickly, but that's the day where these things have to have moved out of one house and into the other. So we will know a lot by May the 4th about what still has legs and what does not. All right, any additional questions or final things that we'd like to discuss before I close out this lengthy session about legislation? Yes, Kim.
Yeah, just because we're doing a legislative update, just a reminder that whenever we're ready, I have that resolution ready to go for support for LGBTQ rights in the face of so much legislation that's happening in our country. So I'll just keep reminding us as we move through the legislative process and updates.
Thank you for that, Kim.
Have we heard any different advice from our local legislators or our lobbyists? Because
Nope.
like I remember hearing that's something I feel for.
Senator Julie Mayfield reached out to us about that.
Yeah, so it's one of those things.
Kim, have you circled back to Julie to talk about that?
I'm just waiting for updates that I'll gladly continue and let everyone know once we have one.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to share with you on that front today. I will make sure if I do get any updates from our
Well, Brad,
legislative
I would-
delegation
Yeah, and I would
to share it
offer
with
that.
you.
And I think that's probably more for us to talk with Senator Mayfield about. I mean, I would hope, I think it'd probably be good to, you're the technician, and if we've got to work on other issues like that, we can talk more with her directly.
Absolutely. Any additional questions today about these or other legislative matters? Okay, we will go back to the mines and work on these things with everything we've got, and hopefully we will exit this session without too much damage done, and hopefully some positive legislative initiatives coming our way. And you can always feel free to reach out to me, but I will make sure to give you updates as they come in. So with that said, I will close my presentation. I appreciate your time, and I will hand it back to Ben.
And that concludes our agenda for today. So, Ms. Campbell, do you have anything else you want to add?
I do not. We have a holiday tomorrow, so city offices will be closed tomorrow. Hope you all have a great weekend, and I'll stop here to see if any of you all have any further questions, things you want to ask regarding the upcoming meeting. Otherwise, Mayor, I can turn it back over to you for adjournment.
And I can just adjourn it unless there's any other questions or comments. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.